Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to this second day of Aurora International Conference on the role of higher education in peace building. This conference is organized by Aurora universities and partners. Before I introduce our today's keynote speaker, I would like to make a brief announcement. You can find at the beginning of each seating row a QR code. These QR codes are for you to download the app, which contains a program and the possibility to find some information about some of the speakers, as well as a possibility to connect and chat with each other in case you can't find the person somewhere in the room or in one of the breaks. The app is there because we didn't want to print out 300 copies, and the program, as you might have seen if you looked at the PDF version, is about 60 pages. That being said, what will we start with today? The role of higher education institutions in peace buildings will be looked at through a keynote by Beatrix Austin. And the title of that keynote is The Power of Higher Education in Shaping Peaceful Futures. Beatrix Austin is the head of the Department of Conflict Transformation Research and acting head of the department or unit on peace education at Berker Foundation. Beatrix is also a mother of 2 school-aged children. In her work at Berkhof, she manages various work strengths, among which the Berkhof Handbook on Conflict Transformation as Berkhof's longest-running flagship publication. As researcher, her interest focuses on issues of dealing with the past, reconciliation, and linking theory and practice, mainly with a focus on peace building. As scholarly practitioner, Beatrix specializes in dialogue facilitation, accompanying transformative learning and reflection processes. Prior to her work with Berker Foundation, she worked, among others, for Search for Common Ground and International Alert. Moreover, she is a founding member of the Vienna Conflict Management Partners. Now, I invite us to jointly listen to Bea's reflections on how higher education institutions can drive sustainable peace building by tapping into their transformative potentials. And maybe we will jointly explore what this transformative potential could actually look like or contain. Beatrix, the floor is yours.
So let me see if I can actually work the technique. First of all, can you all hear me? I think you can. Good morning, and thanks for cabling me up. I brought my remarks on paper today, and it's going to be a little bit easier having my hands free. Ladies and gentlemen, professors, students, colleagues, friends, dear organizers of the Aurora Universities Alliance, especially Selma Porovic and you, Dagmar, and the organizing committee, I convey to all of you the regretful best wishes of our acting executive director, Chris Coulter, who couldn't be here today with us, but who brought or gave me a lot of our and her personal hands-on experience in teaching about mediation and negotiation, which is one of the ways that we can, wherever we go, shape peaceful futures. A warm hello on this sunny morning in Innsbruck. I wrote yesterday afternoon, clearly having forgotten about the fog that usually sits in the city for a little bit. You won't hear it anymore, but I'm a born Tyrolese. I come from Lienz originally, but have traveled the world and now settled in Berlin. And I come to you from the Berker Foundation, this international organization that is based in Berlin, Germany, and whose mission for the past over half-century has been to create space for conflict transformation. I'm honored to have been invited to speak this morning about the power of higher education in shaping peaceful futures. And not the least, since my place of work for the last 20 years has been actively using education and working with alliances of educators to pursue the vision that we share with its late founder, Professor Georg Zundel, that more can and has to be done to direct the knowledge of social and natural sciences towards peaceful, rather than towards mutually destructive futures. At Berko Foundation, we bring people in conflict together. We enable and support learning processes that inspire the development of new perspectives, of relationship, and that change behavior. It's through this that we believe we can actually address conflict and find ways of living together peacefully. We believe that even in the midst of destruction, of social and political conflict, we can actually develop forces of positive change when people engage with each other constructively and together seek inclusive and peaceful ways to address the grievances and the issues that divide them. Our dedicated team of over 100 experts in places from Tübingen to Beirut, from Berlin to Mogadishu, is going strong and undeterred in some of the most difficult places of violence and war. And I come to you today with 3 propositions for where our power lies. Maybe I'll sneak in a 4th, see if you detect it. And convening here this moment in time, nonetheless, I also cannot help but wonder how many of us actually do feel powerful today. Powerful in the knowledge and the conviction that peaceful futures are within our reach. That universities and other places of adult education are the spaces in which we learn how to have our conflicts differently, non-violently, and that they are the starting points for shaping peaceful futures. As we defend freedom of movement and speech, navigate increasingly tight budgets and administrative requirements, and as we're confronted with a shrinking space for both civil society and academic freedom in too many places. And so to start also hearing from you, I want to start with a quick show of hands, if you're willing to play with me. Those of you who do feel powerful this morning, will you raise your hand? Lovely. That is fantastic. That's more than I expected, I'll tell you. But that's me, the pessimist, who wakes up and gets herself determined every morning. It takes all sorts. I want to also invite you to come on a quick journey in time with me. And it's a little exercise that I have borrowed from our peace education team. So would you please think back to the year you were born? Picture what you think it would look like. Picture what the headlines in the newspapers might have read. Picture what you heard when you turned on the radio. Picture how you would have sort of been held by your family in the morning. And then come back to today. And if you compare your year of birth to today, find one thing since then that has changed for the better. Find one thing that shows you the power of positive change. Could I have 2 or 3 examples? People just shouting out a word that comes to your mind, a picture, an image, a thing, a person. Please just go. Thank you. Sir. Yeah, our children. And I'll take one last one, please. Yeah. Thank you so much. We recently worked with a colleague who looks at the power of our brains and how we work. And he says that research shows that people usually overestimate what they can change in the short run, but underestimate what collective action can change in the mid to long term. And I think for me, that is one important anchor to start when we think about the power of higher education, of all of our action in different places towards shaping peaceful future. Let me take you back with me in time. This year marks the 25th anniversary of my graduation from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard in the USA, where I was educated for better public service. 2 years prior, I had lived through an onboarding week in the summer of 1998, which made me want to pinch myself repeatedly as I listened to both Kofi Annan and Nelson Mandela visiting campus in short succession and role modeling how even out of the midst of hardship, oppression and violence, humble peace leadership could be born and carry the day. Not only was I deeply moved by their personal experience and example of powerful advocacy and action for peace, I was also much uplifted thinking that I was there as one first-generation university student, a scholarship holder, and able to attend a 2-year program at a prestigious and, between us, wildly expensive place of higher education. Whether Ivy League or community college, the point of telling you this is my first proposition of power. You, educators, and those who are taking part in education and higher education, you hold and shape a meeting place which is among the most diverse in our societies, now more than ever. Statistics show that today, just under 3 million students are enrolled in universities in Germany, for example, 1 million more than 25 years ago, about half of whom are female, and about 16% of whom hold a foreign passport, as compared to 45% and 10% 25 years earlier. So you, in places of higher education, you get them young. Pupils as young as my daughter, with her 12 years, have opportunities to visit guest lectures, to acquaint themselves with places of higher education very early in their lives. And you get them older. My Kennedy School cohort was much enriched by numerous mid-career students who had already tested some of the theories, some of the hypotheses that we came up with in class in their places of real life. You get them from increasingly different walks of life and backgrounds, and the still influential privileges afforded by social class are notwithstanding that. So many people come through university and places of adult education. And while one thing we lament in modern times is that people have far fewer spaces in which they interact with people who are different from themselves, universities are one of these places. And there's power in working with this. I think back one last time to my Kennedy School times. I took a class on leadership. And in that class, we came from civil society, from military backgrounds, from government backgrounds. We were fairly green behind the ears. We were seasoned diplomats who were taking a break. And in one of the discussions, I was reflecting on how difficult I found to inhabit leadership as a relatively young woman who did not come from privileged upbringing. And one of my fellow students who was a military, he burst out and said, "I have no idea what you're talking about, and I really can barely listen to this." And that was an incredible moment. It was uncomfortable, yes, but it was an honest encounter where we could actually figure out why we sometimes have difficulty working together or have difficulty getting along. I haven't had many of these opportunities. My university days were these opportunities. And I think all of you who shape higher education, who participate in higher education, you inhabit a space where these encounters can still happen. And I say to you, that is one source of power in shaping peaceful futures. That is what it takes. We need to talk with those who don't think like we do. Back to today. In our work at Berkhof Foundation, we often refer to the saying from the preamble to UNESCO's constitution, that since wars begin in the minds of men or people, it is in the minds of men or people that the defenses of peace must be constructed. But what if? What if we as educators were not just shaping minds, but actually creating peacemakers? The peacemakers for tomorrow. At Berkhof Foundation, we engage in building spaces for dialogue and peace education that resonate with what I envision when I talk about university using their immanent convening power to shape peaceful futures. Building on our experience of the last 50 plus years, we know that for conflict transformation to happen, and that means for conflict to actually serve as a motor for a fairer and less violent future, we need to invest into three things. And I'll take you down into all three of them with a few examples so that you can get a feel for what I'm talking about. The first one is dialogue, critical thinking, and resilience. The second is relationship building and enough trust to work together on our shared problems. And the third is futures thinking and innovating beyond what we know now, because we are facing new problems that we do not have solutions for yet. Let me say a bit more about each of these and connect them to examples from my place of work. So number one, places of higher education, places of learning together as places of dialogue, critical thinking, and resilience. One of the critical and complex challenges of our time, what the elders call one of the three existential questions for humankind in the 21st century, can exemplify this: climate change. Science has established beyond doubt that planet Earth is being exposed to human-made shifts in weather and inhabitability. In many places, these developments are starting to make their effects felt, yet populations grapple with detecting them for what they are, with finding good responses to them and doing so in a collaborative way. But for good solutions to be found quickly, dialogue, the ability to observe and listen and talk to each other, is essential. An example where teams affiliated and trained by Berkhof Foundation have made use of this is a collaborative project with Africa University in Zimbabwe. And I know that Ian, who spoke to you yesterday afternoon, made a really powerful case for working with organizations and people affected on the ground. I think that is something that cannot be overemphasized. So I'm happy to sort of stand on his shoulders figuratively in developing this forward. More than 40 years after Zimbabwe gained independence, land ownership and control remain a huge challenge for local farmers trying to make ends meet in the country. Without official documents for land tenure, a type of law that determines the control farmers can have over the land they don't own, it's impossible for them to secure irrigation infrastructure from local authorities to water their crops. Now meet Margaret Chaikosa, who works at the Center for Conflict Management and Transformation in Zimbabwe. After taking part in an insider mediator training that was organized jointly by Berkhof and the Africa University, she decided to bring parties together to try and find a solution to this problem. She tells us, The training helped me to identify networks that the CCMT can leverage to escalate the issue of land rights at the national and policy level to a point where it actually demands attention. It also enhanced my capacity and my confidence. The training approach, focused on negotiation and dialogue to reach a compromise, greatly enhanced our advocacy efforts and impact. And the more parties that are heard, the more I sense a greater openness toward finding a solution. Now, the parties involved in this dialogue process include the local authority, irrigation service providers, the Irrigation Management Committee representing farmers. The conversations and negotiations aren't simple, they're still ongoing, but the initial steps are promising. And they show the fruit that dialogue skills can bear for collective problems caused by climate pressures and compounded by rigid administrative or legal frameworks. In addition, and looking outside of Zimbabwe now, universities have traditionally often been key spaces in demanding critical dialogue by engaging in peaceful protests in order to highlight fundamental tensions. One can go back in history memory to the protests against the war in Vietnam in the 1960s, or solidarity protests challenging the apartheid regime in South Africa. But we also see many current-day examples, such as the climate protests of Friday for Future, which are led by young people and students, or protests in which some of our partners have found their calling to subsequent political dialogue. Meet Dr. Nadia Al-Kwabani, the program manager at the Political Development Forum in Yemen, where Becker Foundation has been supporting keeping doors open to dialogue and peacemaking for over a decade. She shared with us the following. I teach at Sana'a University. When the demonstrations began outside the university in Change Square in 2011, I was one of the academics who supported the protests and held teach-ins on the revolution at the square. Later, I was invited to become part of the National Dialogue Conference that was initiated as a result of the protests. That's how I became involved in peace building, out of the conviction that Yemen needed the effort of all Yemenis, especially women, to work on dialogue, on finding solutions, and on creating a political process. And finally, an example close to home, our recent protests held at a university in Berlin, the Alice Salomon Hochschule. Some of you might have read about them in the news. Talking about Gaza and about the war between Israel and Palestine has become increasingly difficult and is now quickly criminalized in Germany. And at the same time, it is essential that we remain able to talk about it. In a case a few weeks back, students had, for a few hours, and it turned out, in prior consultation with university leadership, occupied the university hall to shed light on the plight in Gaza, without diminishing the horrors of October 7, 2023. And whereas police suggested to enforce removal of the students, the university's director, to much later critique, but most effective dialogue, insisted that her university had the power to form a holding environment around these forms of protest, which demand that difficult conversations are being held rather than suppressed. Let me try and come to my second category. You remember, I said we have skills for dialogue and critical thinking and resilience. I want us to think about the skills it takes to create places of relationship building and trust, which is another power that you have in places of higher education. Building peace or overcoming legacies of past violence in our practice requires the building of and the building up from strong and robust relationships. In one of our research projects, we wanted to find ways to deeply listen to the experiences that had led women to fight in armed groups and those that had then led them to leave the fight and seek political and social roles. Working with what we call insider local researchers and using peer interviewing and filming, the process generated trust, and from the close relationships resulted the sharing of stories that we had not heard before and that helped break many gendered stereotypes. 2 books and documentary films later, women from the Philippines came together to organize intergenerational dialogues, which created a real shift in the relationships between parents and their children, with the parents often having fought, being absent, coming back, carrying scars of trauma and of hardship, and the children's often growing up in an environment where these things had to be silent. And both the mothers, the aunts, the nieces, the daughters were telling us afterwards that they could now finally understand what the other one was going through. And they felt they were better equipped to engage for social justice in their communities as a result of it. In other projects, we often gather partners that we work with across different localities in the world in what we call peer exchanges. So people who have chosen a similar role in very different settings come together and share both their successes, but also their questions, their struggles. Creating these networks of exchange and solidarity between those who are seeking a path from violence to political and social action and reconciliation has been incredibly powerful. Some of the most powerful tools, indeed, in shaping peaceful futures together. These can be formed in our peer exchanges, but they are also formed in places of higher education. Just think for a moment back to one peer who has accompanied you since you attended university, who stood by your side, who you still reach out to swap ideas, to ask for advice, to share elation or despair. Or maybe think about the people who are studying with you and imagine who's going to still be there 20 years into the future. My third category, and I'm going to speed us up a little bit, is the one that invites us sort of in tetralemma systematic to look at the things that we don't know yet. So both in conflict transformation and in higher education, in these days, places of futures thinking and innovation are absolutely critical. There are areas that we recognize as increasingly important where we don't know yet what to do about them fully in our work towards peaceful futures. Among those, in my mind, are the impact that the increasing pervasiveness of online communication and entertainment and distraction have on us. And there are also the inconsistencies and structural injustices that persist in our systems and institutions. And here I'm also reflecting on working and the limitations of working for an international NGO based in the global north, trying to support change in countries of the so-called global south, in war-affected countries, where one of our prime but very difficult tasks is to actually work at eye level and to recognize and put into a space where they can be effective those people from the conflict settings who have the knowledge and who have the insight, rather than coming from the outside with a one-size-fits-all approach and trying to teach people too much. So we need to exchange our knowledge much more, and we still need to develop better processes of doing that successfully. The calls upon us are to innovate and to imagine different futures, as well as what it will take to make these futures desirable and fair for all. This will likely take initiatives in decolonizing, applying a self-reflective frame to our work, and it will also require mindful digitalizing and continuing to understand better how our engagement in the digital space affects our abilities to communicate and to relate. So, Summing up, in very similar areas, universities and conflict transformation organizations can, and I hope you'll educate me on all the places in which you already do, turn into incubators of the leaders, the ideas, and the research that can influence peace in profound ways. My second proposition for harnessing the power of higher education for shaping peaceful futures is hence to invest in this skill building, to invest in building skills for resilient and respectful dialogue, skills for peaceful and nonviolent protest and resistance, skills for future thinking, for livable communities, and an understanding for the psychology of relationship building and maintaining, also under the shifting communication dynamics, such as wired through social media and artificial intelligence. One university that has recently been highlighted by the British newspaper The Guardian for such efforts is Belfast University, itself, of course, also a product of a place in conflict over many decades. In particular, the university's Senator George J. Mitchell Institute for Global Peace, Security and Justice. They build their work around these principles, practical peace-building approaches. Researchers at the Mitchell Institute prioritize listening to diverse perspectives and addressing complex narratives, placing victims' voices at the forefront of their work. This methodology has been instrumental in shaping conflict resolution processes not only in Northern Ireland, but also in countries like Colombia or Uganda. They seek global influence. They are ambitious. The Institute's development of the Belfast Guidelines on Amnesty and Accountability has garnered international attention, serving as reference for organizations worldwide. They hold educational programs. By integrating practical experience with academic research, Queen's University equips students with the tools necessary for effective peacebuilding. And this holistic approach ensures that graduates are well prepared to contribute to conflict resolution globally. And finally, they do research for action, ensuring that research is impactful and more than theoretical is at the core of what Queen's calls an experience-respectful approach and what we at Berkeley Foundation would probably call participatory action research. It is a model that has informed conflict resolution and peace-building processes far beyond Northern Ireland. Kieran McAvoy, one professor at Queen's University, has conducted research in conflict and post-conflict settings worldwide. And he actually worked with the FARC, a guerrilla group that was mandated by Colombia's Transitional Justice Court to issue an apology for the international crime of kidnapping. His research, originally commissioned by the United Nations on how armed groups can offer effective apologies, was then utilized by FARC as part of the Colombian peace process. And this last point allows me to jump to my third proposition, which says that we are more powerful together. Practice, research, and education must stand closely united. Berkeley Foundation is no university, yet we have proudly worked next to university partners for whom we could provide access to practice, which helped them generate more valuable insights for research and educating the next set of peace builders, much as you heard in the example of Queen's University. At other times, we are the accessibly and practice-orientated research partner for political actors, or bring the experience of senior experts to light so that the knowledge base available to other practitioners or for future research may grow. And let me give you another example of what that can look like, mindful of the Ukrainian partners in the Aurora Alliance and also here today. In the context of Ukraine's evolving conflict and war landscape, the development of leadership among female diplomats for us emerged as a critical endeavor, which aligns with Ukraine's commitment to gender equality and the integration of European values. We developed a program in close cooperation with the Ukrainian Ministry for Foreign Affairs that is designed to address the challenges and opportunities facing women in diplomacy in Ukraine. This program is dedicated to building a strong and supportive community for women, particularly those in leadership roles. It grows a platform for sharing experiences, for exploring new opportunities, but also critically for finding mentorship and support. A wide range of activities, including workshops and meetings, helps to create that environment for dialogue, for peer learning, and for collaboration. Personal and professional growth is integrated as well, as the program seeks to empower participants to navigate their professional journeys effectively and acknowledges that that takes personal work. The overarching goal to create a network of peers and mentors, laying the foundations for a future where female diplomats are not only well represented and well respected, but thrive as influential leaders in a conflicts environment in diplomacy, is something that we wanted to contribute to and to support the political forces in the country. So, in addition to these three propositions, I want to make one final case, and that is to strengthen not just higher education as a place or a space for shaping peaceful futures, but to bring peace education itself into the institutions of higher learning too. Piloting and developing curricula is one strong option here. But meet one of our board members, Neha Sangraika. She was closely involved in mediating peace in Mozambique between 2019 and 2024. And in a forthcoming book, she highlights the importance that conflict parties and mediators themselves placed on peace education. At the end and throughout in brainstorming, they wanted to find ways of creating a new culture of peace, and decided to include peace education in the national curriculum, to develop a campaign that said peace is our culture, and to use existing community-level structures, including peace clubs, to advance reconciliation. These initiatives promote a culture of peace and inclusivity and try to really bridge between generations again, looking at long-term reconciliation that will be an ongoing process and challenge for years to come. But adopting this whole-of-system reconciliation framework, the Ministry of Education was actually seen as the ideal home for reconciliation at the national level. This approach recognized the potential of youth as agents of change and of peace, with almost half of Mozambique's population being under 18. The importance of anchoring peace education at the core in the long run is also highlighted in a letter that we received recently from Pakistan. The letter was sent in reaction to learning about work Berke Foundation teams do on countering disinformation in classroom settings in Germany. But the sender emphasizes, disinformation here does not just threaten democratic values. It exacerbates sectarian divides, it marginalizes vulnerable communities, and it fosters radicalization. Peace education is not merely about civic engagement, but about fostering resilience against harmful narratives that exploit societal fears. In Pakistan, where misinformation can incite violence or deepen polarization, the need for grassroots peace building, media literacy, and interfaith dialogue is really urgent. And while initiatives like Digital Truth, that is the program that Berkov runs, focus on misinformation in classroom abroad, Pakistan needs a more localized approach, one that involves educators, community leaders, and digital platforms working together to empower young people with critical thinking skills. My work in this field has shown that countering conspiracy thinking is not just about debunking myths. It's about creating alternative, inclusive narratives that promote dialogue and understanding. As Pakistan navigates complex socio-political shifts, investing in peace education is not just an option. It is a necessity for more stable and inclusive futures. And so we've come full circle. My brief was to start us off today thinking about the power of higher education in shaping peaceful futures. And let us all go forward knowing that at our hands we have the power of access and convening, the power of strengthening skills for dialogue and collaboration, the power of cooperating in alliances between academia and practice, and the power of anchoring peace education in the curricula of institutions of higher education, as well as others. So in sum, we, as scholars and practitioners, have the power to shape a new generation of peace builders. It's up to us to ensure that conflict resolution and transformation is not just a skill for the few, but a mindset and a skill for the many. Thank you very much.